Best of r/malicious compliance episode 136. Subscribe for Reddit videos daily. You can have a drink, but only out of these tiny cones. Close to a decade ago, I got my first job as a dishwasher at my local Pizza Hut during college. It was a chill place to work, my managers were good people, but as these stories tend to go, the cool GM went on to pursue a career as a car salesman, and a new bitch of a woman was brought in to replace him. She was universally hated by everyone, and when she eventually quit, the entire staff working that shift stopped what they were doing and cheered. Only one person felt bad to see her leave. While she was there, she basically made it her mission to make everyone's life hell. Most of it I could deal with, but there was one thing that I was stubborn on. My entire employment I'd keep a medium-sized drink cup in the back with me, out of the way. She did not approve of this. However, I tend to need a lot of fluids throughout the day compared to others. Nothing medical, just always have been that way. We had some cone-shaped cups worth about 1 gulp per fill, but those were a good walk away from me, and I'd usually need at least 3 trips over there per hour of at least 5 refills each on these pathetic cups. Since they were cones, they'd fall if you tried to keep them standing. I got tired of this and eventually started maliciously complying. First, I would take 3 washed glasses and arrange them together, with a paper cup in the middle. At least I'd have a quick drink nearby, even if it wasn't much. I was still using the cone, after all. This was not acceptable, of course. I was told that I had to go up front and not keep the cups with me. So I did that, except I suddenly tended to be much thirstier than usual, and upped the number of trips and refills massively. Put together, I was probably spending at least 5 minutes out of a busy hour away from my station drinking. This went on for about 2 weeks. My speed declined significantly and I was backed up a lot more than usual. The dishwashing machine had trouble keeping up with rush as it was. If it wasn't running constantly, I was losing a lot of time. Eventually, she caved. I was able to keep a drink in the back where I could fulfill a basic human need comfortably without compromising my work. Not the most fantastic thing off this sub, but a victory I was proud of. If my memory of that time wasn't so hazy, I'd have a ton more stories to tell. MC was a common weapon in my arsenal with this manager. Edit. As pointed out by a kind commenter, I failed to specify that she didn't allow me to keep drinks in my area, which is what caused the MC. This has been fixed. Thank you. Next. Teacher hates senior skip day and tries to ruin fun. Group of troublemakers obey her instructions. So this is my first post here. Apologies if I don't get the formatting right. My dad and I were talking about our respective days in high school and he shared how he and his buddies got back at their grouchy old math teacher, Mrs. Schaefer. According to Dad, Mrs. Schaefer was the best teacher he had ever had and he and his buddies gave her endless grief, including using the phone in the classroom to pull a prank on another one of their pals. However, she took things way too seriously. She was stern, strict and was the kind of person who could never take a joke. Everything had to be done exactly right. Of course, Dad and his buddies, being teenagers, saw her as someone who could use livening up and gained reputations as class clowns. He told me that Mrs. Schaefer probably thought he and his friends were going to be criminal masterminds or something. Every year at this high school, they'd have senior skip day, which every senior looked forward to because, hey, it's a day away from school. Mrs. Schaefer, in her grouchiness, detested senior skip day and decided to ruin everyone's fun during my dad's senior year. To this day, Dad swears that she picked that year because of the shenanigans he and his pals got into. She announced that there would be a test on this day. Not only that, but anyone who skipped the test because of senior skip day would get a 0, which would affect their grade average. Dad, who had a scholarship lined up at his dream school, was mad. If he missed the test, his grade average would be affected, risking his scholarship. However, he had been waiting every day for 4 years for senior skip day. So he and his buddies came up with a plan and give Mrs. Schaefer the most grief she had ever had in her entire life. Senior skip day rolls around. Dad and his buddies went to play golf early in the day, as their test was scheduled in the afternoon. Once they finished their game, they hurried to the school, not even bothering to change out of their golfing clothes. However, This became a big problem, one dad admitted he and his friends didn't think of. For those who don't know anything about golf shoes have little cleats, spikes, on the soles to help grip on rough terrain. However, wearing them and walking on tile floors is a bad idea. One of them was smart and took off his cleats. But the rest of them were stubborn and insisted on trying to get to Mrs. Schaefer's room in their cleats, which was on the second floor and on the other side of the building. They were slipping, sliding around, grabbing the walls and laughing so hard. Everyone poked their heads out of the classrooms and were confused at the sight of these four guys trying to walk to their classroom in their golf cleats. Somehow, they managed to get down the hallway and up the stairs without breaking their necks and made it to Mrs. Schaefer's room. There was now a new problem. While the hallways had tiles, the classrooms themselves had wood floors, which resulted in the cleats getting stuck. They were clamping around, making a racket trying to get to their desks. Everyone else in the classroom looked up and laughed so hard. Everyone, that is, except Mrs. Schaefer. She was beet red and looking like she was going to drop dead of a heart attack at the sight of these four idiots, as my dad put it, clumping into the room, dressed for a round of golf and laughing as if they had heard the best joke in the world. Mrs. Schaefer yelled, "What are you doing?" and pointed to the once perfect wooden floor, which now had holes in them. Dad, who had calmed down enough, shrugged his shoulders and said we had time between rounds of golf to take the test. So here we are. Mrs. Schaefer, realizing that they did show up to take the test as she told them and that her own ploy to get back at them had backfired, calmly told them to take their seats and gave their tests to them, glowering at them the whole time. When they were done, they climbed back out before slipping and sliding around to catch their next tea time. At least Mrs. Schaefer was fair. Dad passed the test and kept his scholarship. To this day, those holes are still in the wooden floors. Edit. Words and added context. Thank you. Next. Mooned my head manager to get sick leave. Cast. Me head manager nice manager. On mobile so sorry for format. Backstory. This is 2008. I had been working for a local fast food chain for a few years and had been a really dependable employee. I always came in early, filled in for other employees when they were sick or had vacation. Mostly when they were sick though. This is important cause a lot of employees were abusing the policy, causing head manager to require physical proof that you were sick. But since it's a small town you could get a doctor's note pretty easy. So if she didn't believe you she would ask for additional proof. Of course I was young and stupid, and I really didn't know the law at the time. For a while I had been suffering with a cyst that had been growing on top of my butt for a few months and this was starting to really affect my work since it would make it harder to walk as the day went on. Nice manager had noticed this and confronted me about it. I told her what was going on. I was waiting for my vacation in a few weeks to check it out. This didn't go over too well with her, so she confronted my mother about it when she came by for her evening sweet tea. Like I said, small town. Everyone knows everyone. I was admitted for surgery the following day. That just so happened to be one of 2 days off I had. Doctors ended up removing a golf ball sized cyst from me. Also released later that day and was given very strict orders not to do any lifting for entire time I had the stitches in. And I was to be out of work for 3 weeks. The next day I needed to go to work and hand in my doctor's note and collect my paycheck. Since it was payday, my mother had to take me. Since I was on painkillers and unable to sit, much less drive, I hobbled into the building, in a pretty good amount of pain since any movement from the waist down hurt. Then asked to see head manager. She yelled from the back for me to come to her office. I could tell she was not in a good mood from her tone. I slowly make my way to her office. Once I get there, she hands me my check and I hand her my doctor's excuse. She reads it and flips. Head manager. What do you mean you are out for 3 weeks? Me. It was a really big cyst and the doctor said I had to take it easy. I'm getting kinda irritated and lightheaded at this point due to the pain and the meds. Head manager. Well, you look like you can't move around pretty well right now. I even have you on the schedule to work tomorrow. Me. I'm sorry but I really can't do that. Head manager. Prove to me that you can't. Me. Trust me, you don't want to. Head manager. I said prove it. Me. Okay, I then proceed to turn around, bend over and pull my shorts down, revealing a large blood-stained gauze. I hear head manager gasp in shock. Head manager, OMG, okay. I believe you. Go home, she said as I was pulling my shorts up. I turned and looked at her before leaving and she was white as a ghost. Later on that night, I got a knock at my door. It was nice manager. She had came by to check on me and tell me about how I ran to the bathroom after I left and threw up. We both shared a good laugh after that. Head manager was replaced by nice manager 2 months later after the district manager fired her for some reason I never learned. Also, yes, I know it was irresponsible of me to let something like that go for months. Like I said, I was young and stupid at the time. Thank you. Next. My mother told me to pick all my stuff from her place, so I did it. Excuse all grammar errors. English isn't my first language. This is also my first post ever, so don't be harsh on me. The relationship between me and my mother is really bad, and has always been. I might tell about that later in different community, but here's some backstory. My mother is very narcissistic, so every fight between us has always been my or my father's fault. Last year I cut ties with her, but it hasn't been that easy. I have also a sister who is still in connection with her. Their relationship is big part of my mother's and my bad connection. But enough of that now. Julia is my sister and Claire is my mother. Names are obviously changed. I've collected some stuff from Claire's place before, but I didn't want rest of my stuff to be there anymore since my official address is in my dad's place now. I called Julia to go trough my stuff in our call, which he did. I was going to pick the stuff that I wanted to be at my new address. Later the evening, it was Thursday. Because of her and Claire's good relationship, Julia wanted to confirm that it was okay to Claire. That didn't go so well. Claire flipped completely to Julia because I still had key to Claire's place. I ended the call with Julia so they could sort the fight. In the call with Julia we had gathered up a bag of stuff. Julia got really emotional because Claire yelled to her because Claire was angry to me. After midnight I called to Julia and Claire was already gone to sleep. We talked about the situation and she told me that I had to get all my stuff from there and return the key to Claire's new partner. If I wanted some stuff, I would have to get them all. After that I decided to call my dad about that and he said that we will get the stuff later with a trailer. So it's Sunday now and Julia was at Claire's place alone, so we went to get the stuff. Claire told Julia to say to me that I had to get the stuff when Claire's new partner was home because I couldn't give a key, which I still had, to Julia. Claire's partner wasn't around, but we still went to get the stuff. They are my stuff and I should be allowed to get them. If you don't agree, please tell that to me in the comments. Maybe Claire meant with all my stuff a huge box of my belongings, but we took it all. My desk, shelves, school books, nightstand, notice board, dishes, old toys, the box with my stuff and a huge part of my baby pictures and keepsakes. Claire will be very pissed and sad, but honestly I don't care anymore because she has hurt me mentally countless of times. I also left the key on the table. I didn't give it to my sister. TLDR, my mother wanted me to get, maybe, a box of my stuff which she referred as all of my stuff. So I took all my stuff, including furniture and baby pictures. Thank you. Next. All the comforts. Cross-posted from military by request. Germany in the 80s. There was a yearly recurring nightmare called Reforger wherein NATO brought reinforcements into Germany from all over the globe to demonstrate how badass we were. It was 6 weeks of smelly armpits, grey undergarments and mud. I was in a small aviation company and was their de facto liaison officer and aviator extraordinaire for these affairs because of my intimate knowledge of the local culture and ability to arrange military affairs. I was responsible for site improvements, which meant finding and arranging better field sites. A major part of this was to coordinate with the local porta-potty purveyors so that adequate facilities were available. One fine day, our battalion commander visited and observed how well set up our location was. He was particularly interested in our toilet facilities. Once he had returned to HQ, it was announced that we would be relocating, that night, to a completely unimproved mud hole and that HQ would be moving to our location. We dutifully packed up, issued chalk numbers to all vehicles and at 2 AM, drove out to the new site as the colonel smilingly watched us pass by. His smile completely disappeared when he saw that, in our midst, Happily convoying along was the local porta potty purveyor with his honey wagon, septic truck, and all 4 potties on the back. Good luck with your army-issued toilet paper, sir. Thank you. Next. Bank department manager wants me to work harder, not smarter. Sorry for the long post. TL. Doctor. Manager doesn't like efficiencies because she wasn't the one making them, and forces me to do things the old, slower way. Circa 2010, I was working an afternoons gig at a local bank in part to complete an internship class for my coursework. The job entailed running batches of checks through a massive check scanner, manually running a tape, using an old calculator called a 10 key with a printing function to make sure the checks matched the deposits, and then hopping over to a computer to correct any errors on the teller or customer's part when the deposits were made. After the bank closed, 3 p.m., I was also the one who would stay and print out customer statements and run a long list of processes on multiple machines to update everyone's accounts with the day's transactions, upload the information to the website, backup and runs tapes on all of the bank's data, and sort and file through end-of-day reports for the different department managers to review the next morning. I would then lock up the bank and go home. In hindsight, quite a bit of responsibility for a college student, but it was a hometown bank. Now, my manager was a classic Karen before the term existed. She managed through fear, tried to cover it with small talk and banter, and didn't like anyone to shine except herself in the department. My 2 co-workers, full-time bank employees, would always discuss how terrible it was to work for her full-time. Anyway, I was raised to be respectful and work my hardest, which to me meant trying to be as quick at my job as possible, thus saving the company time and money. The closing duties I described took anywhere from 1.5 to 4 hours to complete, depending on which batch of statements were printing and how often the crappy printers jammed. After about a month of doing this every day, I realized much of this time was due to the checklist I had been trained with. It was doing one task at a time when actually, more than one process could be done at once. Many times way out of order of the list, but you had to understand everything's part to really see this. I set about making these efficiencies, and brought my time down to 0.5 to 2.5 hours after 2 months. I thought this would make my manager happy, but nothing was said about me getting out of there faster, and so I just kept on doing my job as best I could. Fast forward 2 more months, and this bank is updating its servers to allow for real-time banking. Previously, unless I updated the website each night, balances and transactions wouldn't show up. They brought in 2 large server cases into the office I worked in, but it took another 3-4 weeks for the actual hardware to come in. Since the old servers were still installed, they set the empty towers right in the middle of our office. Now, our office was a very long room, the statement printers on one side, and all the computers I had to work on each night at the other. Remember I said the printers jammed a lot? Well, with all the computers and servers on my end of the office, I never could hear the beep telling me they had jammed, but I could see the red error light. This had historically been my little check. Every few minutes I'd turn around to make sure the printers hadn't jammed. I made sure I did this because every minute they weren't printing was another minute I'd be working. The statements took longer to print than the rest of my duties combined. However, the way they placed the empty server towers blocked my view, forcing me to have to get up and walk halfway to the printers each time to make sure they were jammed. So, I simply turned them 90 degrees. Since the front and backs were full of air ventilation holes, this allowed me to maintain my line of sight, saving me, and the bank, time. Once again, I thought great idea, no one is using these yet, and when they do, they won't be in that location anymore. Anyway, in hindsight, I should have known better. I came in around 2 p.m. after classes the next day and noticed the towers were turned back. I thought that was odd. Why would anyone turn them back? I asked my co-worker and she told me the manager was pissed I had touched them without asking, which, as I've learned later in life, was fair enough, but still an overreaction. I asked had they being turned messed up some workflow I wasn't thinking of, but no, she hadn't even noticed them until about 11 a.m. when another employee mentioned they had been turned, so her reaction was pure malice for not having been asked. When she saw I had come in, she pulled me aside and asked aggressively why I had touched them. So, thinking this was my chance to highlight my efficiencies, Told her all I had done in an effort to make the closing routine more efficient. That was evidently the wrong answer. I was instructed to do the checklist exactly how it was laid out with no changes whatsoever because that's how it's supposed to be, even though I had been doing it my quicker way for 2 months already with no downsides. With regard to the printer, she told me to stop being lazy and just get up and walk to it to check on it. Cue malicious compliance. I stopped caring about speed, followed the checklist to a T, and, unless I had somewhere to be, didn't worry about checking on the printer very often. If it was still printing after my closing checklist was done, I could always read or do homework at my desk. Wouldn't want to be efficient with the bank's payroll. After all, suffice to say, it went back to taking 5 to 4 hours per night, and costing the bank much more money in my checks. Good for me, I guess. Shortly after, I found a job working in an electronics department at a superstore, and switched over with 2 weeks notice. There wasn't time to train a new person, so that manager had to take over the night routine until a new one could be found. During my last day, I took it upon myself to try and give her some constructive criticism in how her management style affected me and stopped me from caring about my job. I'm not sure if it was effective, but at least I got it off my chest. I ran into one of my former co-workers at the store a few months later, and evidently someone else had out and out told my former manager she was a vile and mean person and she was probably going to hell for how she treated people. Part of her Karen persona was being very religious, and this seemed to have scared her into at least some meekness, at least according to my former co-worker. Thank you. Next. Won't be taught by a girl, so he got fired. So, I used to work for my grandparents on an oil farm in Texas. I was 17, freshly graduated from high school, and had moved from the Midwest to Texas to live with my grandparents and work on the oil farm they worked for, doing some easy data entry. The building was essentially a tin building on the job site where my grandma and I, the only 2 office workers besides my grandfather who was the foreman, worked. Basically, when the new hires would come in that had missed the initial hiring round, I was the one that would make sure all their paperwork was in order and that they had all of their OSHA classes finished. And if any safety training hadn't been done, I would just put in the VHS and confirm on a written copy that they had finished it under my instruction. This went on for 2 months with no issue until one fateful day, a regular Florida man, record and all, came in as a new hire and came to my office to finish his new hire paperwork. Once he was in my office, I found he had no safety training to speak of, and I informed him his next day or 2 would be spent in my office watching safety videos. All of this was paid, of course. He immediately flew into a rage, screaming about how he wouldn't have some little girl teaching him how to do his job, which again, I was a 17-year-old female. At the time, I now identify as non-binary, and was only going through company standards and OSHA rules with him. I went to my grandfather, who was my boss at the time, obviously very confused and uncomfortable and unsure of how I should proceed. To which my grandfather said, "You wanna fire him?" Cue my excitement. My grandfather follows me to my office and I, as a 17-year-old, get to fire this grown-ass man sitting in front of me. I start directing him to gather his things and leave, and he starts up a huge fit, yelling and cursing at me, before he noticed my grandfather standing in the door with his gun holstered on his hip. My grandfather usually kept this locked in a safe on the ground or in his truck. I hadn't realized until after he'd pulled it out just for me, and very quietly then he got up and left. The most satisfying moment of my life. Edit. Changed Q to Q. Sorry y'all, I wrote this drunk at 3 AM. Edit. Enough with the transphobia, please. Obviously gender has a lot to do with this story, so I just wanted to include that I identify differently now.